What up, everybody? Another week of R2C2. My esteemed co-host is not with us this week, but that's okay because we have the best possible
Let's
fill-in
go.
co-host, the best possible fill-in co-host, maybe at any moment, but certainly at this moment in time. Richard Jefferson is here on R2C2. What's up, man?
No, it's good to be back. It's good to be back, man. I appreciate you having me on as usual.
I feel like I should say like the original author of the active athlete slash media member co-host podcast because it all started with Road Trippin.
Well, you know what's funny is that like when you're in the middle of it, you're not paying attention. But now, like as you can continue to see media evolve, I get more and more proud of that the further I get away from it. Yeah. Right. Which is something that a lot of times, like, that's just not the way things work sometimes. When you're in the moment, you're like, oh, this is cool. Yeah, we were the first ones. But it's like the more that you're like, holy shit, like this thing is not because it's like, oh my God, road tripping. It was just more of like, the more that it got out to people, the more people were like, that's a really good idea.
Here's my question to you, because there's been a lot of this like, new media is like the catchphrase right now, right? For seeing different kinds of media and active athletes and whatever. And I'm wondering, Richard, what, like, when you hear that term, what do you think? What do you think? Like, what do you think is the? This is sort of just a broad question that I'm not actually wording totally correctly, but I guess let me just say what goes through my head and why I'm asking this, because I think about like when I think about what Draymond did during the playoffs and finals, right, with his pod, like to me that is incredible stuff, because he was unguarded, he was totally diving in, right? And so you actually feel like, wow, like I'm getting this view that I could only get from Draymond, right? I feel like you have a lot of the same characteristics and qualities when you hosted your pod too. Like, hey, this is the reality. This is what I'm feeling. And also you have a host skill set, which I think Draymond does as well, where you can like pull stuff out of guests and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then, but you also have, if you eliminate all old media, or if you're not that, you also have athletes who maybe they have their own platform, but they're still going to be very guarded, or they're not going to want to, and it may not even be appropriate for them to dive into their personal stuff, right? Like it's sort of, as much as I enjoy the Etceteras podcast and I shout it out all the time, it's like, it doesn't feel like a credible episode if Kevin Durant's going on there talking about what's going on, but not able to say anything. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, or it feels like, which I understand, by the way, why he couldn't. But then if you're talking about things vaguely and then 2 days later you ask for a trade, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, yeah, that's like, doesn't make us feel really inside your world anymore. So what's kind of the balance, Richard? Because there are some things still as an active athlete you have to be careful about, right?
Well, and that's why a lot of times, you get on there and you talk about more of your personal life, which is always like whatever you're wanting to share, people typically soak it up because they feel like they know you better. And the more that fans feel like they know you and connect with you, let's say your brand, the better off your brand is. But it's weird, man. Like, the more I watch it, first of all, we're all going to make mistakes. I want to say this as a person.
Yeah.
If you remember when I first came into it, I was guns a-blazing. Let's see what kind of shit I can say. No one's stopping me. Let's see, whatever. And I've actually dialed it back quite a bit because you realize that, like, you got to find your sweet spot of having fun, not necessarily pushing boundaries. And I've dialed it more back to like having fun. But that's part of like, training. What I would say to the players, because you do have your media training, but the minute you get into like your own personal podcast, your own personal conversations, there's a different type of media training that comes with that. There's a different type of media understanding that comes with that. And so I just say continue to, if you're looking at the new versions of the players and where, what Draymond did in the finals was big. We did our podcast all the way up through to the finals. We recorded during the finals. We just didn't put out during the finals.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So we did that. Yeah. Because it was like, one, we were going against Kevin Durant Steph, Clay. So we were just like, yeah, we got a bit of a task here.
Yeah.
And we didn't want people to feel like but we did our podcast all the way through the postseason. And so what he was doing, it was magnificent. Did he play into it a little bit? Was he being the heel? That's where him and I we actually agree. We both enjoy playing the heel. He just enjoys like trying to start, or he speaks what's on his mind when he's frustrated or when he's like, he's got something to speak, where I just like to crack jokes about people and things, as all the Yankee fans that are also Knicks fans also understand.
They definitely do understand that, Richard. I know it's interesting because there are also insights, right, that like you can only get through those mediums. Like even hearing like when KD was coming back from injury, like this past season, that episode was fascinating to me. Like hearing some of the details of his rehab that you otherwise, wouldn't necessarily have a platform to dive into in that kind of detail, right? Like I'm only getting there. Hearing Draymond talking about breaking down defenses the way he is, right? But because there's always going to need to be some sort of checks and balances. I look at it as like there's a huge place for both, right? Like there's a huge place for both sort of kinds of media.
Well, and I don't think I'm very cautious, right? Like that term, the new media. I think sometimes we've gotten into these labels, these just labels, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Yeah. What does that mean? And I think I like to focus on more of what it means than what those two words like are. Because what it basically means is that you have athletes that are coming into space, entertainers also, athletes and entertainers that are coming into the space with millions of followers on social media. So that basically means, and these are people that want to talk, that want to follow them. So you don't necessarily need like an ESPN, a TNT to get out to your people, to get out to your audience. And then you're like, okay, well, he's got these people that are following him on a daily basis. What else does he have? Well, now he has a show where he is the show, right? Podcast, this and that, everything is video now. So now he's got a show that he is doing. So now you have millions of people that you have as a reach. You now have another entity as an individual and as a brand of the audio or visual platform. And then you go and you have your deal. Like for me, I work with ESPN. We work for ESPN. For Draymond, he's working with Turner. So you're like, you got millions of followers on social media. You have your own audio visual platform. And then you have the big horses, the ESPN. So now all of them are promoting each other together. Yeah. And so that's what I think the new media is that there's athletes that are coming in that have been media trained, that understand that are bringing their following, that are doing all of these things. And it creates them a little bit of, I don't want to say leverage, but it creates a little bit more of a space for them to be free thinkers, And this is one thing. The reason why I started the podcast is because many, many years ago, Jerry Madelon, I always mess up his name.
Jerry Madelon, yeah.
Jerry. But he was like, hey, Richard, find a way to get more reps. And when I was doing the NBA broadcasting school, shout out at Syracuse, he was like, Richard, find ways to get more reps. So it was like, hey, I want to get used to interviewing people. I want to get used to conversation. So I was like, hey, I'll just talk to my teammates. And funny thing is like Harrison Barnes was the first teammate that I ever interviewed because 2012 when I was with the Warriors. So again, Draymond has been there it was Draymond's rookie year. So I interviewed Harrison. Long story short, my point is that now, because I wanted to get reps before I got into the media space, now all of these athletes inadvertently, they're doing this, not understanding that they're getting reps. They're learning how to, like, people, you'll check your mention. The people like, can you stop saying and ah? And you're like, okay, this is the third time I've seen this tweet. Let me make sure that I, change, how your cadence is. So it all started with me wanting to get reps. And now I watch athletes getting reps all the time in this space.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is about reps. And shout out to Jerry, who's one of the all-time great talent coaches in the history of sports broadcasting, and just a great positive dude. So Richard, I think we're both in agreement of like, kind of what the synthesis of all this looks like and how there is a space for both of them. And you articulated that much better than I did. And I appreciate that because yeah, it's really not about some kind of like war between two labels. It's really more about the cohesion that exists between all these amazing forms of media. But I said this is the perfect time to have you. I mean, it's always the perfect time to have you. You're one of my
Hey,
favorite teammates,
yeah.
but we also are in the midst of a lot of NBA drama and NBA drama that is particularly relevant to a team that you and I both cover for Yes. Richard and I are the ESPN and Yes Network guys. And it involves the Brooklyn Nets, which as of now, no movement on anything happening with Kevin Durant after his reported trade request. But let me just tee you up for this to begin with. If you are the Nets, how are you handling this trade request from Kevin Durant? What are you looking at this situation as?
Look, I look at these things and it's like, people, for instance, people will be like, oh, this is the greatest, blah, blah, blah to never happen. It's like, you got to understand, it's not just talent, man. It's so many personalities. And that's not about Kevin Durant or Kyrie or James Harden. But it's like you look at, teams in the past. You look at Chris Paul and James Harden. You look at KD, Westbrook, and James Harden. Sometimes you get ultra talented players together. And for whatever reason, whether it's the chemistry, the dynamic, or whatever, it didn't work out the way the fans wanted it, the way the league expected it, the way they wanted it. And so I think, now that they're in this space, they're like, okay, you got, and I say this as players, but I'm going to call them assets. You have an asset that everybody wants. Every single person wants. And there are some unique things about this asset, how good it is and the length of contract. And so your job now is to go and find the best thing that you can do. And this is the beautiful thing. And where if you're bummed out, here's the silver lining. If you're the Nets fans, you're bummed out because this didn't deliver a championship. It didn't do what you want. But the silver lining is if you do these next two pieces right, of trading of Russell, I'm not Russell, if you're trading Kyrie, there's been a lot of talk for him for Russell. If you're trading Kevin Durant, you can put your franchise in a ridiculously good position for the future. And that's the part that I think is the silver lining. You're not starting over. You're not going back to the pre-Sean Mark days. You're not going back to the no picks and this. No, you could possibly get a young all-star like a Brandon Ingram. You can get multiple other pieces around. You can get, and a lot of it has to do with like a three-team trade. People have talked about DeAndre Ayton. All of these things. All of these things are things that would put you in a position to grow again. Because we remember when Kenny Atkinson took over and before KD and Kyrie came here, the reason why they wanted to come here was because it was a culture space and it was a space that like they had made themselves attractive to free agents, right? They had made themselves attractive to free agents. So the fact that they were able that they're now in a position to kind of retool and change the franchise versus like starting over, we lost this guy in free agency, blah, 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 blah. I think, it sucks. It's part of the business. But I think the Nets can still, come out looking strong in this if they do it right.
Well, that's Richard. I feel like they have to do it right? Like this is your chance. So for me, I'm looking at it like you have two options. One is get everything you want exactly as you want it. Or two, you show up with Kevin Durant still on your team. He's under contract for 4 years. And I don't know what kind of conversations would have to be had to get him to, buy back in. But the irony of it is, Richard, I'm looking at that roster and especially adding TJ Warren, adding Royce O'Neal, Patty Mills, Seth Curry, Claxton, Joe Harris coming back from injury, around Simmons, Kyrie, and KD. And look, this has been the theoretical roster for years. So, who the heck knows? But it's not like it's not like you're looking at that team and you're saying, well, I can't win here. Like, clearly, if everybody played up to their ability, that's a team that could win a title. So it's really more about how, things just, ended up just sort of crumbling.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
But if I'm the Nets, like, I'm also, look, like, I understand that you're also going to try and do this with as little acrimony as possible, and it is an opportunity that, like you said, Richard, could still be great for your franchise, but you owe nothing to anyone other than your organization and putting it in a position to win. And if that ends up being still keeping Kevin Durant, you have to be willing to go that route, because KD loves the game, man. And there's just, this guy is not going to sit out or dog it on the floor. Like, I just can't see that from Kevin Durant, who pours his heart and soul into his play on the floor every time he touches it.
Okay. So I agree. There's some aspects I agree. And I think there's some aspects that we should clarify this on.
Yeah.
One, yes, Kevin Durant is under contract, right? Kevin Durant is under contract. And the length of the contract is something that makes him even more of a valuable player. I say asset because it's something that's tradable, right? So that makes him very sought after. I think the other thing is that every team in the league wants him. So, like, you have to go, you're going to get the best offer. The minute he shows up on with the Nets, if he's requested a trade, in my opinion, the value goes down. The value goes down because now teams are like, well, this is what we have and we're going to move on and we're this. So right now is the best time to maximize.
So you think they're getting more for him now than if he comes to training camp?
Yeah, because eventually, and this is where a player, if he doesn't want to be there and he's not 100% locked in, he doesn't perform well. Your player, you perform as a professional, but you don't perform well. Right? Not to your best of your capability. So I think you want to try and avoid that. And I think sometimes, and this is just my opinion, and we love each other, Ryan.
Yeah.
When people are saying that, oh, well, he signed a contract, you should make him show up. And it's like, there's thoughts of that, but it's also, it's understand this. The owners and teams, like, when they deliver a contract, there have been certain promises. For instance, Blake Griffin, he re-signed with the LA Clippers, and they do this whole, like, your jersey's going to hang in the rafters. We want you started here. We want to end your career here. We want to do all of these things, blah, blah, blah. Signs a contract and then is traded that spring. So now how is it that for Blake Griffin, he's like, wait a second, I got drafted by here. I won Rookie of the Year here. I've been all NBA here. I helped make the Clippers a relevant organization. And right after I signed my deal, and I've been here for 9-10 years, you guys want to trade me, right? And so people look at it from that space and you're like, oh, well, that's just business. And it's like, well, wait, I was told that I was going to end my career here and I was going to have my jersey in the rafters. So that's not a case, but no one shits on the team for that. They just call it business. But if a player signs a contract and then the situation around them in the organization is not as such as something that either they were promised, discussed, talked about, or even enjoy and want to be there, it's like, make them stay there and play. You're
right.
We cannot have it both ways. So This is where I say, like, from a players that's been in it, who is now in the media, I don't think players should just be willy-nilly, I want out of here, I want out of here, I want out of here. Agreed. I don't think that is the right solution. But we can't look at the solution and say, you're under contract, you're making a lot of money, you got to go play. That is the exact opposite of the way we should do it. And let me say the last thing. I had a chance to, when we were on ESPN doing the free agency special, everyone's looking at these player contracts, talking about how crazy they are. Well, this is the problem. 450 players are splitting the pie down the middle with 40 owners. So if you're like, man, Jokic got 276 million. Well, if you're looking at 50% of the pie, the Kroenke family, just got 250 million from the TV deal and from the Nike deal and from all of these other things. So the league is making so much money, but a lot of times we focus just on the players. That's why these franchises are being bought for 700 million, and now they're worth 3 billion, right? Because the value of these things go up. So before we start focusing on how much money the players are making, understand that there's also the behind the curtain, the owners are making a boatload of money. So we have to take the money somewhat out of it, outside of obviously public perception, and say like, hey, what is best for the organization? What is best for this individual player? Because if you hold players hostage and you do that one too many times, players will not want to sign in free agents.
Oh, I totally agree. And to clarify my position on this, because I agree with you, Richard, from what you're saying. Like, you can't have the double standard of like, hey, I'm fine with a team, dealing somebody who's under contract, whatever, after those verbal promises and making them feel it's going to be a certain way. But I have a problem with the player going to them and saying like, look, I don't think this is working. It's time to go. I actually don't. I don't love it for Kevin Durant's legacy that he would try and hop to another, top seed in a conference. I don't think that's the best way to play out his legacy, but maybe that doesn't matter to him. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think it's going to help anything in the conversations when it comes to the annals of basketball history, but that may not be a priority for him. So if he really just wants a different experience, while I may be like, dude, that's like not going to help you in the way people look at you, I don't begrudge him. I don't begrudge him for that. However, what I would say is, I'm saying if I'm the Nets, I feel no obligation to do it unless I get what I want because of him being under contract, right? So what I'm saying is, I can look for deals like, hey, Kevin, hey, Rich, like I'm happy to try and like work this out. But let me just tell you, you're Kevin Durant. I can't sell you for 60 cents on the dollar in a trade, right? Like I can't do that kind of deal. Like, I understand I'm never going to get equal value for you because you are, you're a one-of-one talent, and let me tell you, watching Kevin Durant every single day over the, last 2 seasons while he was, healthy for the Nets, like as much as I already appreciated his greatness, I appreciate it even more because that dude pours his soul into the game every night he steps on the floor. But I would just be like, look, to me, I don't think it's infringing upon goodwill to say, I'm going to try and get this done for you, but understand we can only do this if we get X, Y, and Z, because otherwise our franchise is kaput. If the Nets make this deal for a couple of role players and, 4 first-round picks and 3 swaps, that is that could be a franchise, cascading move. You have got to make sure you walk away from this with a prime level talent that you believe you can build your next, contending team from.
Agreed. But Ryan, what happens if those offers don't come in?
Then I think you tell Kevin, I tried. Look, we tried, but there's nothing there. I'm sorry. There's nothing there.
That's fair. But now you have a person who says they do not want to be there. The team is saying that, hey, look, we will respect this. So what? And again, I'm not taking sides. We're just having this conversation.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting conversation to play it out. Yeah.
Because if he doesn't want to do that, and again, this is the red button. This is worst case scenario. At what point in time does he take it to another level of like, I do not want to be here. I do not want to be here. I'll take the fine. I'm Kevin Durant. I've made $300 and $400 million in my career. You want to fine me some money? Okay, I'll take the fine. But ultimately, like a player, if you're saying that you're willing to get a divorce, but the person that you're willing to get a divorce from says, okay, I'll divorce you, but I have to make sure that I get a good girlfriend first. When I find a good girlfriend, then I will let you get a divorce. And it's like, no, if this is either going to be an amicable divorce and you have some leverage, because this is the thing, the Nets, every team has almost made, half the teams have made calls for Kevin Durant, half the teams. So if half the teams have come together, then the market value is high. that means it's your job to go get the best deal right now. Not saying that we want more, we're going to wait 6 more months.
Yeah.
That is where you got to be careful if you're the team, because now you got Kevin Durant showing up. He doesn't want to be there. The fans know he doesn't want to be there. And now you're almost putting the player in a tough spot after you guys have come together and agreed to do something. You've agreed to make a trade. You've agreed for his people to go out there and search for this stuff. And now you're in a position where you're like, well, we couldn't find anything, so we just come back and play. And it's like, when does that stop? The next year? What if it goes through the whole season and they lose in the first round? And you're just like, well, until we find something like that. And that's, I know that this is extremist, but it's still like, hey, we've got to handle it.
He's though, like, if it was Kyrie, like, you don't know what that dude's going to do. Like, he is not somebody who you can, like, he'll retire before he'll do something he doesn't want to do. We kind of saw that this past year, right? Like, with KD, like, I have to, like, I can't see that dude wasting a year of his prime. I just can't see it.
That's like threatening him. Not like threatening him to a certain degree. Let me phrase it. That's not threatening them, but that's like hedging a bet.
But as an organization, their loyalty isn't their loyalty isn't to Kevin Durant's happiness before the organization doing what's best for it. You know what I'm saying?
Agreed.
Right. It's like, hey, we're going to try and make you happy. We don't want to screw you over, but we're also not going to napalm the organization to make you happy. So that's kind of the balance that I think they have to walk right now. Now, if it got to that point, Richard, where there were no offers that they found appetizing, like, or acceptable, I think then you'd have to circle back, have more conversations with Kevin and say, like, hey, I know we're in a bad place. Can we just talk and see if there's anything we can do to salvage this? Because you don't want him, well, to your point, you also don't want him coming in miserable, right? Like, or not wanting to be there, because then he's not going to have the whole buy-in. I mean, it's a weird spot to be in. I also, like, granted, I had a personal investment in Kevin Durant being with the Nets, right? I've very much enjoyed getting to watch him play with them, and it's great for us, yes. But I really thought it was a great legacy play going to a franchise where it was kind of like, could be your own, right? And like, let me go takes even building the fan base, all of that, right? And I really thought it was a great play from that perspective, that I was like, oh, and I thought it was only going to further help the way those Warriors titles were looked at if he won in Brooklyn, right? Like, if he could somehow navigate to one, not the exact same thing, but somewhat similar to LeBron with Cleveland, right? Like, and then the way you look at the Miami titles, although I don't even think that's fair to LeBron, but you understand what I'm saying, because LeBron wasn't joining a team that had just won 73 games. It's different, but the same sort of thing, right? But him going, like, maybe he just doesn't care. Like, I know everyone always says he just wants to play, like, a basketball, beautiful rhythm, but like, dude, if he goes to the Suns and they win a title, like, is anyone,
if he just, again, we can't hold people to a standard that they don't hold themselves.
You're right. You're right.
So, and I'm not saying that we need to hold Kevin Durant accountable, but if he doesn't give a shit about that and he just wants to go play basketball and he doesn't care where and all this other stuff, then like that's his journey. That's his journey. If he's like, you know what? Every 3 years, I want to go to a different team and see if I can help them win a championship. If that's the journey that I want to be on, well, nobody's ever done that. Kobe played for one team. So-and-so played for one. It's like, that's their journey. Kobe also requested a trade. He literally requested a trade. They were close to trading him to Chicago, but after Kobe saw everything that they were going to have to give up from Chicago, he would basically be going there and playing with very, very little. So we can't sit up here and make it seem that Kobe Bryant in his 20 years in a Laker uniform was perfect.
No.
But that's what I'm saying. He literally asked for a trade. And then when it didn't go through, now everyone's like, look at Kobe. He stayed with one franchise. He was different. And it's like, guys, everything has a certain bit of situational real life to it. And when I look at Kevin Durant, if that's what he wants to do, then that's what he wants to do. And that is his journey. But I don't know. I look at it as like, my thing is this. Let's say this, we'll play a hypothetical game. I have absolutely no truth. I don't know Kevin Durant. I don't, Kyrie and I haven't really spoken to him in a while. What if this wasn't his first place? What if this wasn't his first choice? What if Brooklyn wasn't his first choice? Maybe if it was his second choice, but then he knew that he needed to team up with Kyrie. And this was Kyrie's first choice, and Kyrie convinced him to come here. And it was like, hey, we're going to have all the things. They're going to take care of us. We're going to have input in the players that we play with. They're like, okay, that sounds good. I'll come here. Now Kyrie's gone. Now, before we go, why are you hitching your wagon to Kyrie and all blah, 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 blah. Let's just keep it on the tracks. What if this wasn't his first choice? And then him and Kyrie, that was the idea. Now Kyrie is on his way out. He opted in, but Kyrie's on his way out. And now Kevin Durant is like, this isn't even really where I wanted to be. I came here because I wanted to play basketball with someone. And for whatever reason, Kyrie and that situation blew up with the Nets for all the reasons that everyone knew. So then you left Kevin Durant somewhat holding the bag of like, well, now I have to worry about my legacy because, Kyrie and the Nets aren't getting along. And this isn't really where I wanted to be in the first place. I was here because of my boy. So now what do I do? And so like, that's the way I'm thinking about it, is that I looked at this as more of like they came together. It didn't work out with Kyrie. And now Kevin's in a place where like, hey, this isn't real. I want to play basketball. And I felt like this was a good situation for all the reasons that you mentioned. I can come to a franchise. I can have an impact. I can do all of this stuff. And like, cool, this could be my space. That didn't work out with the people next to me. And so now I'm stuck here as like, I'd rather go play basketball with people that I fuck with than to like build my legacy with a franchise that hadn't won a championship.
Right. Here would be the counter, which is, I think, a strong one from a net fan looking at this will be, yeah, dude, but you're the one who like went to bat for Kyrie, this dude who has, caused crazy destruction to the franchise at this point. You're the one who pushed for the James Harden trade and then couldn't keep it together with Kyrie. You obviously had some kind of role in what happened with the head coach, right? Like prior with Kenny Atkinson, and now that there's some adversity, you are like, oh, I'm just going to lay waste and run. And honestly, I get why they would feel that way. I understand Kevin Durant looking around saying like, well, if Kyrie's not like, this isn't the place before, but it's also like, but you and Howard Beck actually, I thought wrote a great column about this on SI, kind of in the sense of like, if Kevin is really upset about how acrimonious it's become with Kyrie, and that's one of his two reasons for wanting to leave, right? And then the other is because of what a mess last year was, but you're not connecting the dots that the reason last year was such a mess is because of Kyrie, and so there's not really a through line of logic here or rationale. It's sort of like making one decision, then making another, and just kind of reacting without taking responsibility for any of it.
Well, you can take responsibility, but that doesn't change the fact that he doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right.
That's what I'm saying. You can take all the responsibility. And that's the part is that like, like somebody was like, oh, this is what happens when you let players run a franchise or when you let players have an input. It's like, this is the 75th year of the NBA. Do you know how many head coaches have done shitty jobs? Do you know how many presidents have done shitty jobs? Do you know how many GMs have done shitty jobs? Do you know how many shitty jobs have been done in the league? When you think about how many things have been done, how many things have been done and done poorly, it's like, oh, the Nets trade and oh, this trade and all these things that happened. That wasn't done by players, but people quickly want to point to the players. Right. And say, oh, well, these guys, and this is why you don't do that. And I'm like, that to me bothers me a little bit because it's all about who you give that freedom reign to. LeBron James, like he has had input in the players that he plays with. LeBron James has won 4 championships and won 4 finals MVPs. Tim Duncan, I know I've seen him and Pop go back and have conversations during the trade deadline, probably about getting my ass out of there sooner. But like these are the things that they have. Tim Duncan's won 5 championships. Now, some people might be more out in the front with it, like when Kyrie's saying like, oh, it's up to me and Josiah and Sean to, and Kevin to sit and talk about the direction of the franchise. Some players are a little bit different. Yes, you have to be careful who you allow to have that type of space inside your franchise. Not should you allow the players that are the greatest minds, the greatest basketball athletes to say, hey, I think this guy is good. I've worked with this guy. I've spent time with this guy. This guy is I've competed against this guy, versus somebody's on the outside just being like, I think these things would fit great. And it's like, no. But I think people have to look at this situation in a very, I'm a move on. I'm a move on person versus to like,
hold on person. You're a move on versus a hold on. Oh, 100%. How about that? How about that, Richard? Yeah, you like that?
I need a shirt, man.
I agree. Can I I have no knowledge behind this. Let me be clear, because of my role, people are going to think this comes with knowledge, and I swear it does not. So I probably shouldn't even say it, but whatever. This is like just a theory I've thought in my head, Richard, and you tell me if you think that this could be plausible, okay? Like, because people have wondered, okay, why does Kevin want to move on, right? Because if you just look at the roster right now, knowing Kyrie is back, the roster's good. Knowing Kyrie's back for this year, opting in, like, if you wanted to, you could run it back, say, hey, let's make one more run at it, see how it goes, and you have a shot, right? If Ben is healthy, you have a shot with that team to win. And honestly, to your point about the Kobe comparison, depending on what the team that Kevin goes to is giving up, that roster may be weaker than the one he's currently on by the time he gets there, right? So maybe there are just unsalvageable things at play that he feels like he can't be here anymore. That could very well be true. But what if it's this, Richard? What if he doesn't want to play with Kyrie anymore? Everybody has assumed that one of the reasons he wants to leave is because he's so upset at the way these negotiations have been handled. But what if the real reason he wants to move on is because he wants to separate from this guy, but doesn't want to be the bad guy, doesn't want the friendship to be, in question, but just knows this guy isn't right for him and doesn't see a path to staying that doesn't include Kyrie for one of a couple reasons. One, maybe because it'd be too weird to like not have Kyrie there when he's the guy who brought you, or two, because if you're shipping Kyrie out, you're selling so low on his ability that what you're getting back is not going to be enough to make you a championship team, and thus you wouldn't want to be there anyway. What if that's why he wants out, Richard? What if it's actually because he doesn't want to play with Kyrie anymore, but he can't say that because he doesn't want to hurt the friendship or hurt feelings? Like, to me, with this, I have no insider knowledge on that whatsoever, zero. But to me, that would make more sense to me than looking at what is on the roster right now and saying, yeah, like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. That would make more sense to me, because to me, I look at the roster and I say, that's a team that can compete.
I agree. Look, maybe he doesn't, especially when you look at, long-term, whatever. Now, if Kyrie would have signed a long-term deal with the Nets, that would have been the real, like, that would have been the very, it's like when he opted in, that's when KD said he wanted out. But again, I think these conversations typically started long before we knew about them. Look, this is a really interesting situation. And I think we can talk about all the reasons why, but I'd rather focus on the where. Like, where are they going to be? Where are they going to end up? How is the league going to shift? If he goes to the Western Conference, what that does to the Western Conference. If he stays in the Eastern Conference, what that does, So I think it's complicated.
Richard, I agree. I'm curious about the focus on this. How about this? Just a prediction from you. When do you think this ends up getting resolved? Do you have any feel for that?
I think this is going to be a 3, maybe 4 team trade, right? And when you have that amount going on, I think it could take days, if not a couple of weeks. Summer League could actually impact it. If a guy gets drafted 8th and goes out and looks outstanding in Summer League, and now all of a sudden he could play himself into the deal, right? It's like, well, man, we thought he was, so I think there's a lot of things that can happen. You're talking about a lot of picks, a lot of trades. I know the Nets want under 25, 26-year-old stud. And if that can mean a top 3 pick that was just drafted, that can mean a guy like a Brandon Ingram or somebody that's a young all-star.
Scotty Barnes.
There is that conversation. And so, there's a lot, there's a lot of things, and there's going to be a lot of people sweating when these type of things kind of come up.
I think the thing I would look at is if I could get Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, 3 firsts and 3 swaps. That would be the deal and if you're Toronto, you still have enough there to be a championship contender.
Still got Van Fleet. You still got a lot like those 3 guys. You got a number 1. You got a 1B who's already proven he can be a great 1B next to Kawhi, and then you got a great point guard in Van Vliet.
I think that's, if I'm looking at one team where I think the Nets could still feel good about the haul, that would be it. They'd have no one to score. But you know what, Richard? Maybe they just come back. Maybe they all get together. They come back, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. All right, man. Thanks for talking through this with me. Thanks for sitting in for CC. Appreciate you, man. You guys know the deal. New episodes every Thursday. Bonus episodes as well. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page. R2C2 on all social channels as well. And we'll talk to you next week with CC back. Richard, you're the man. Thank you, dude.
Appreciate you, Ryan.